Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of the Argument Clinic. My name is Martin Sigalo, and I'm joined by my lovely podcast co host who will reveal his name to you shortly.
Hi, I'm Lawrence, and it's great to be back. It's a new year already. That's fast.
A new year already, that's fast, has been called. How was your new year and holiday season, Lawrence? Mine was fine. I didn't do a lot other than go to debate things.
Yeah, you were at the Lake Highland Round Robin, of which I was supposed to go judge at, but unfortunately, I had to go debate myself. So I went to the California Swings, which are like two policy tournaments back to back, and then I immediately following that went to the Harvard Westlake Round Robin and tournament. So in the space of 2 weeks, I went to four debate tournaments.
That's not at all reasonable. And what a Dickens, Lawrence not coming to my tournament. Very, very, very silly. Hopefully he was winning, which is good.
I was
So
not.
so that's where I was. I had been having a pretty good time. Didn't see Lawrence during any of that time. Will you be at the Emory tournament, Lawrence?
Unfortunately, no. The school that I'm working with is only sending one person, so I am not needed.
How about Harvard?
No, because the school I work with is in California. It'd be silly if we flew all the way to Harvard.
How about Central Florida Forensic League state qualifiers?
If someone would like to fly me out to that tournament, I would gladly go.
Yo, dude, you have to get hired for Woodward. Anyway,
Ooh, actually,
and
yes, you're right.
another another thing for a later date. So this is the Argument Clinic podcast. If this is the first time that you're turning in, we're a podcast dedicated to helping you improve yourself at debate, whether you're a grizzly veteran of the tournament scene, which is like a veteran of the tournament scene except you're a bear, um or a brand spanking new novice competitor, or just someone who likes to chuckle around with old buddy Lawrence and Martin, or someone who just is desperate for Lincoln Douglas debate content and wants any podcast that they can consume about this. This is the podcast to you. Before we get started, just want to shout out Angela Zhang, who was a debater that I encountered at the Strike Jesuit tournament. She said she was a listener of the podcast and was a pretty good debater. So congratulations to Angela.
Congratulations for listening to the podcast.
Well, she also broke at the tournament.
Oh, okay, that's fair. Yeah, before we get into the rest of this, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Victory Briefs, for just sponsoring this podcast. The camp is now open for registration, and you can sign up and join people like me. I'm not sure if that's a selling point, but you can at camp. And you should also check out their blog, where we'll be posting articles about camp and debate coming up real soon.
True dat, true dat. So, our topic is efficiency. We'll get into that extensively. This is a choreography episode. For those of you who are new to these characteristics, choreography episodes concern what you're supposed to do when you are in the debate round. How do you improve the mechanics of debating, and how do you debate well when you are inside of it? Efficiency is a very important topic. And when we get back from the break, we're going to talk about exactly all that goes into efficiency. So stay tuned. This podcast is going to be a little shorter than usual. We are going for efficiency after all. We have two main things that we're going to talk with you about. Number one is kind of the theory behind efficiency. How does efficiency work? What is it? How do you get good at it? And then the number two in the next segment is we're just going to talk about some drills, some very specific implementations of efficiency stuff that you all can use to get better.
So the first question, I guess, is sort of what is efficiency broadly? I think I have an answer. What's yours?
So my belief is that efficiency is kind of like the ability to persuade your judge of something in as little time as possible.
Yeah,
We're kind of the emphasis is on the time part of it.
right. So I think my definition is actually pretty similar. It's just like the most amount of information in the least amount of time. And I think both of our answers are strongly characterized by conveying information to the judge in a persuasive manner in the shortest amount of time possible. So I think it's actually kind of straightforward what the definition of efficiency is. I think the harder part is sort of determining what counts as efficient and what is inefficient. So how it sort of works in a practical sense.
Well, so if you'll permit me to push back a little bit. So one of the things that I've struggled with actually for figuring out efficiency, because as you listeners of the podcast know, efficiency is all something that we all know is good already, right, Lawrence? I mean, like we know that it's good, but I think that sometimes people like misdo it because they don't quite understand the goal. So, so maybe let me just like pose a hypothetical to you, Lawrence. So, or I don't know if it's a hypothetical. It's a question at the very least. No, it's a hypothetical. What am I saying? So, yeah, hypothetical. So so you have kind of like you've just like listed off a bunch of facts about plea bargaining, and you do that very quickly. So I don't know. Maybe we will just disagree on this, but my feeling is that that's not efficient, because ultimately the point of efficiency is not like it's not just conveying data, that it's kind of like convincing the judge of something, and that may require you to do other things in not a lot of time, but that those things aren't always conveying information. So for example, well, I mean, what do you think about what I just said?
I I
Did it
don't
make
know
sense? Did I
because
lose you?
yeah, because like to some extent, I think that efficiency is simply one component of like overall persuasiveness, and that a persuasive debater has so many different skills and so many different attributes and characteristics, and I think efficiency is just one of them. To some degree, I actually think it is just efficient to list a bunch of data about plea bargaining. I certainly don't think it's persuasive, which is why I don't think of efficiency as sort of requiring a persuasive element. But I do think that that efficiency needs to be constrained by other important goals, like being persuasive.
No,
Um,
I think you're right, and
so it's hard to say.
I think that I put my example in kind of a bad way. What I really meant was, do you think that efficiency is just a goal for the conveying of information, or is it also a goal for some of those other things? Like for example, if you're telling a story or something,
Right,
and telling a
certainly.
story is good for persuasion, it's also good that that story be short, right?
Right. Well, not necessarily short, but that it is the most time efficient way of conveying that particular story. Because
The most effective it can be given time constraints.
right, exactly. Yeah, because like I think that, for example, persuasive debaters are efficient, and I also think, but I don't think that efficiency necessarily is persuasive because it needs to have other elements. And it's not. I don't think it should be that important because obviously this podcast episode isn't going to be like to be most efficient. You should just bullet point and list about 400 facts about plea bargaining or whatever the topic is at the time. So I think we'll be talking about efficiency in the context of persuasion, so that it's not too big of a deal that we don't really have a precise answer about this.
That makes sense. And I just to characterize what we just said, I my personal belief is that it is important to consider efficiency not just about information, but to also be efficient about a lot of the other things that we talk about in the various episodes, including things like storytelling and persuasion. Is important to be efficient about those too. But Lawrence, you're right that efficiency just applies to all of them maybe differently.
Sounds about right to me. So I guess the first question then is sort of, and I think we've been leading into this, is sort of why is efficiency good? And I'll start with the first answer, which is just like obviously it is a debate, and speeches are short and time constrained. And so like you need to be able to convey information within that limited time because you only have so much time to give information. I think that that's kind of obvious, and but I still think that most people sort of overlook this part because as much as everyone says, you know be word efficient. I don't think people really understand the importance of being efficient, and I think there's a few other elements other than just speeches are short.
Can I just talk a little bit about the speeches being short thing?
Yeah, I was going to
So
elaborate, but feel free to go for it.
let me know if I'm echoing any of the things that you would have said or whether I unjustly preempted you. So so one of the things that people forget about the fact that speeches are short is all of the other things that we've been telling you to learn on the podcast, right? So we tell you to do things like, oh, it's important that you be persuasive, which means it's important that you have storytelling. It's important that you have organization, that you give your speeches a kind of top-down variety. It's important that you weigh. It's important that you turn arguments. And once that list starts to get really high, you start to realize that if you look at any of these lessons in isolation, it should be pretty easy to construct a speech. If the only thing you need to do in your speech was weigh, for example, the speeches wouldn't be that short. But the thing is, debate's hard, and we're telling you that you need to do all this stuff. And as a consequence of that, speeches are even shorter than you think. Because when a lot of times people are plotting out their speeches, they haven't factored in the fact, oh, I just need to add an extra 30 seconds of weighing that I wasn't doing before in order to improve. Oh, in order to improve, I need to get better at extensions. That's an additional 30 seconds that I wasn't thinking about. Persuasion, storytelling, that's another 30 seconds. And if it just takes you so long to do all of those things, then you won't be able to do a lot of the other things that we're recommending you do on this podcast. Does that kind of make sense, Lawrence?
Yeah, actually, that was basically what I was going to say. I think you just put it a little bit better. That absent efficiency, all of these other things that contribute to an overall, sense of efficiency or not efficiency, but perception and persuasion, you can't really do any of it. So like, as you were mentioning, weighing and stuff, but even just, being a slow, persuasive speaker, because obviously people who talk really fast generally aren't super persuasive to parents. If you're not efficient, you just won't have the ability to be a slow, persuasive speaker that incorporates all the other things that we've been talking about. And that's really important, actually. So I think really the speeches being short issue is, I think we nailed this on the head, right?
Yeah, we nailed it right on the head.
All right. So I think there's a second layer though, which is that it's not that efficiency necessarily is crucial to improving your ability to be persuasive by opening up the space for you to do things such as weighing, speak slow, tell a story, etc. But I actually think that efficiency is itself sort of intrinsically persuasive when done right. And so what do I mean by this? To some degree, it's not that hard to sort of intuitively envision, because it's just like when someone says something forever and ever and drags it out, like one of your teachers is just saying the same thing over and over in the same words with the same phrases, and they're not adding anything of interest. Well, you start getting bored and nothing happens. And so, but teachers who are capable of, telling a lesson plan and like really just explaining everything in a short, succinct fashion that helps you understand it, well, that's actually kind of persuasive. And it's because I think, in my mind, people who know how to effectively convey a message in the fewest words possible that directly conveys the message to you, those people demonstrate to other people they know what is going on. They know how to be persuasive. And so it's not just that efficiency contributes to persuasion by allowing you to do other things that are persuasive. I just think that people who demonstrate efficiency are persuasive.
So I agree with your conclusion. I would like to just like maybe introduce a fact about the reasoning for that conclusion that maybe you find interesting. So I think that so it might be tempting for us to say like, well, the reason that people find other people who are efficient persuasive just in and of themselves is because they just like see the fact that someone's efficient and they can just like really empathize with that, or maybe empathize is the wrong word, but just like they can recognize that and then think, oh, that's good. I think that's not quite how it works, but the effect is present. Part of the reason why, and let me know if this jives with anything that you're saying, I think it partially has to do with just attention.
Right? Oh, yeah, how did I miss that part? Yeah, you're right.
So really, it's not that, because a lot of the people that are judging you will not know all of those they will not even know the word efficiency and how it applies, but they'll just, start to get bored with what you're saying if it takes forever. Right. So, and also people like it when you just say short phrases. They're way easier to remember after a debate. Like it's way easier if you just like tell someone something and then they aren't distracted by random other extraneous things, etc.
Yeah. I don't know how I missed that, because I sort of briefly mentioned like, yes, you get boring if you don't say something efficiently. Mm-hmm. Whoopsies. And then I guess I'll just add one more thing, which is that being succinct and being efficient opens up the ability to throw in so many rhetorical devices that contribute to efficiency. And I think people overlook this a lot as well. So, if you just like basically read through any public speaking book and they tell you how to speak, and they'll tell you to do things such as, for example, vary your pace, vary your inflection, vary your tone, vary the words that you use, your word choice to convey imagery, all of that, right? But none of that is actually super persuasive if you're not efficient in the first place. You can't really, it's hard to make a particular word stand out via inflection if you're saying a really long, drawn-out sentence that isn't as efficiently worded as it could be. And it's hard to be persuasive when you're trying to vary your pitch or when you're trying to, emphasize particular parts or slow down in a particular part to like let someone know this is the important part and that's how you keep things interesting. You can't do that if you're not efficient. And so efficiency also in that way contributes to persuasion by allowing you to take full advantage of these public speaking tools that really enable you to sell a message way more effectively than you would otherwise be able to.
I agree.
All right, cool. Well, that was simple. So the I think the next part is sort of what is the project of efficiency?
So I wrote this down, so maybe that's why Lawrence read it with a little bit of hesitancy. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, so we know what efficiency is, we know why it's good, but I kind of want to give you all a tangible plan of action to associate with efficiency, because one of the things that I'm sure you all know is that efficiency, maybe not exactly in that word, is the thing that a lot of us get told after their debate rounds about like things you need to get better at. A lot of times people use the word economy, and we'll get to that later. But a lot of times people say you need to get more efficient, but that's way easier said than done. It's important that you know that you have to be efficient, but it's more important that you can actually do it. So this will go back to kind of what I was saying about what efficiency is, but I want to give you a sense of what should be your project. If you want to get more efficient, how should you go about doing that? What are the sorts of things that you should be thinking about? So in my mind, the project of efficiency overall is that you are able to convince people of things in not so much time. So you have a limited amount of time. You have to communicate with people across that time. You can look at efficiency of, if you look at if you look at the total amount of time that you spend, and then you look at how many things you've actually convinced somebody of, then I think that in that case, it's efficient. If that number is bigger. Now, of course, the time you spend it in different places is important. But one thing that I really want you all to understand, and Lawrence, maybe you can weigh in on this. In my mind, the important thing with efficiency, and I think this is important when you look at it from just a macro perspective, where you just look down at a debate round from the perspective of did I convince people of things over time? And the idea is that you can spend a bunch of time being efficient in the sort of purely technical sense of you've just all your sentences are really simple and short, and you removed every extraneous word from what you said. But if that doesn't lead to actually convincing somebody of a thing, you still aren't efficient, right, Lawrence?
Yeah, I mean, not really efficient at convincing anyone for sure.
Well, the idea is just that efficiency is if I saw someone being efficient and I saw someone who made 5 arguments but convinced the judge of none of them, and then I saw someone make 3 arguments and convince the judge of all of them, that third person was way more efficient even though they made less arguments, right?
Right, because they maximize what they did with their time and the payoff relative to what they've invested. So they're efficient.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. And basically, the key thing that I want you all to get from this is that don't let efficiency, in a purely technical sense, compromise your ability to persuade the judge. When Lawrence was talking about all of those important things where you use efficiency to create the space for persuasion. And the important thing is to not let that efficiency compromise your ability to be persuasion. What we're not telling you to do is we're not telling you to just make arguments in 5 seconds and make 20 of them. That doesn't do anything, because if you don't actually convince the judge of any of those 20 points, you haven't done anything. And remember that in debate, the only thing you can do is convince your judge of things. That's it. So if you've said a lot of stuff and you've removed a lot of extraneous words, but you haven't convinced the judge of anything, you still lose. And in many ways, you are not efficient. So the project of efficiency is, in short, to make sure that you can convince people of things without losing time that you could spend doing other things. Or rather, that all of your time is used appropriately, that there's not time that could be cut that is still there. because that time has the effect of making you less persuasive in other areas. That all of your time serves a purpose, that there's no wasted set of 3 minutes that we could take out and it would just be as persuasive. Every minute serves a purpose, and that means every minute can be used to convince people of things.
That was better put than I could have, so I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Don't sell yourself short. By the way, where does that phrase come from?
I don't know. Is
Wait,
it just discrimination against short people?
Maybe. Isn't it the stock market? Isn't like selling short like a thing?
I have no idea. Perhaps.
Like I know like short selling or a stock. I think that's like when you want it to go bad
Oh.
or something.
Anyways, speaking of efficiency and how efficient our podcast is going so far, what are some, I think, examples of things that are efficient and things that are not? Because I think it's kind of easy to sort of be like, this is efficiency. And in a vacuum, like this, efficiency is just like maximizing your ability to communicate across time. But the fact that everyone is told this to some degree, and yet not as many people do it as they need to, means that I think people are having a disconnect between the sort of theory of what efficiency is and how to implement it into practice. So I think it's worth going through a few of these examples.
There are obviously two main areas where people can be inefficient. One of them is in the written product of their case or something like that. And then the other one is in what they say off paper. Now, looked at kind of from a macro perspective, both of those can be solved in exactly the same way, which is that you have to just try and figure out the things that are unnecessary and cut them. So for the next segment, we're just going to talk about if you were to just transcribe a speech that is either on paper or off paper, and then you were looking for stuff to strike out, what are the sorts of things that you should look for? So let's talk about examples of things that are inefficient. And for now, I'm going to talk about types of things. So one of them is extraneous adjectives. So it can be easy to kind of go off on persuasive adjectives for certain items, but ultimately, a lot of times adjectives don't really contribute to the overall effect you're trying to produce, or certainly when you have them to excess, they don't do all of the things you need. So one of the things that I frequently tell my debaters to do when they're reading through evidence and they're trying to cut down cards are you look for words that are extraneous, but especially you look for adjectives. Adjectives are the easiest ones. So Lawrence, do you have maybe some examples that we can use for this?
So here's an example of a sentence that might sound a little efficient at the moment, but actually is a little bit inefficient. Plea bargaining is the ultimate injustice because of its particular heinous, inequitable, disparate, and unfair treatment of particular groups of minorities.
Okay,
so
what was wrong with that?
Yeah, so in the middle, you just have a few just unnecessary adjectives. And, some people might say that each one of those adjectives added something there. But for one thing, I said the word injustice twice. So plea bargaining is the ultimate injustice because, and then ... of its unjust treatment of particular groups of minorities. Already, you've got a word that's obviously just repetitive and is not needed in the full version of the card that we're cutting. And also, it's just like the word highness, for instance, also doesn't need to be there. It seems to contribute functionally the same effect as ultimate injustice. So really the only parts that you need to sort of keep in there are the inequitable parts, the inequitable adjective. That's the only thing that really is adding anything of value to that sentence, in my opinion.
So tell me if this sentence is better. Plea bargaining's principal injustice stems from its inequitable treatment of minorities.
Yeah, and already you have a sentence with, I would guess, the same sort of emotional resonance and impact, with, I would probably guess, like 33% less words. Like a full clause of that statement was just shaved off there, almost, because of just so many adjectives being eliminated.
Yeah, that's true. Which kind of leads me into the second area that things are inefficient. But I want to give some background to this. So a lot of times writing cases can feel like writing an English paper. And one of the things about the American education system that is like a little interesting is, or this may not be true in the aggregate, but it was true at the school that I went to. And I find it to be true with a lot of the students that I talk to. Once students get to a certain level in English class, writing papers becomes somewhat of a kind of like a game to see how much people can prove about themselves. And sometimes people write stuff just to sound smart. Does that reflect your experience?
Yes. I-
So so I know, for example, that I was very afflicted by this problem. That I wrote a lot of sentences to sound smart. And one of the kind of perverse effects that this has is it convinces people that complicated sentence structures are good. In fact, number two thing that is inefficient is complicated sentence structures. Usually, the addition of random excess clauses and convoluted sentences do nothing to increase the quality of what you're saying. So, if you remember when we were talking about why efficiency was good, one of the things that Lawrence talked about towards the end was the need for simplification. That is actually one of the main areas you can get efficiency gains. You want to make what you're saying, the sentence structure at least, be as simple as it can be. So usually what that means is you want to use active verbs because it saves time. You want to just say this causes this because of this. It can be easy to get wrapped up in writing flowery sentences that sound good. And I'm not saying you should never have a flowery sentence that sounds good. I love flowery sentences that sound good. But ultimately, you have to realize that those do more harm than good most of the time. And that, in fact, the best thing that you can do is simplify your sentence structure, and that will solve a lot of things. The second type of simplification is simplification of particular words. This goes back to the thing that I just said. If in general, well, it's actually slightly different. Lawrence, do you have anything for the like simplification of sentence structure? Do you have anything in terms of efficiency there?
So here's a sentence from a piece of evidence that I don't know if actually anyone has read yet, but here it is. Plea bargaining is neither the cause of these problems, nor is it a solution to any problem, other than the very real fear a person has that they stand to lose everything when the juggernaut we call the state comes barreling down on them like runway train. Wait, did I say runway train? Runaway train. That's what I meant to say, Martin. Um, so yeah, this is a sentence that perhaps has some sentence structure issues, and we could instead change or modify a little bit to make it a little bit easier to understand and a little bit more efficient.
Okay, how so?
So I think we could say instead of that long thing, we could say plea bargaining is neither the cause of these problems nor a solution, other than the very real fear a person has that they stand to lose everything. And already we've cut this sentence into like half, and that really like awkwardly phrased and very long clause in the middle, I think goes away and it becomes a lot easier to understand.
Um, Maybe also like plea bargaining doesn't cause a problem, or whatever. Let's not distort the sacred piece of evidence that we've concocted. But it is a good example of some convoluted sentence structure that can be easily simplified. Okay, so the second kind of simplification is words that are too long for their meaning. This is kind of a corollary to the last thing, and it's generally if you can use a shorter word, you should just do it. Which is if you have a word that is big but doesn't really convey that much more stuff, like it's not big with a useful purpose. It's just big to be big. Like instead of saying big, you say gargantuan or something, or instead of gargantuan, you say humongous, or a bunch of random words that really just could be said in a much simpler way. So Generally, also another reason to do this is the attention thing that we were talking about above. You only have a limited demand for the attention of your audience, and it's important that you command that as much as you can. Okay, so Lawrence, do you have some examples for us?
Yeah, so this is one where it's on the sort of border because some of these words, I don't know, might really convey like an emotional sense to the listener that it might actually be useful, but some of these words are just seem a little bit long for their own sake. So here's a sentence: immunizing prosecutors from claims of racial bias and failing to impose any meaningful check on the exercise of their discretion in charging, plea bargaining, transferring cases, and sentencing has created an environment in which conscious and unconscious biases are allowed to flourish. And so, it sounds like really good, in my opinion. But if we were to sort of rewrite this piece of evidence our own way, I, for example, would remove the word immunizing because it's really not necessary to just say like protecting. And the word, like, for example, flourish, like that's just clearly a word that is supposed to be there because it makes them try to sound smart. Whereas basically the claim of the sentence can be just boiled down into, uh, you know, failure to charge prosecutors and impose checks on the way that plea bargaining is implemented allows racism to continue. And that's basically all the sentence is saying, except in a much shorter way that doesn't use so many large words.
So another just bit of surgery that you can use. So let's take one clause of this sentence, which we have plea bargaining, transferring cases, or plea bargaining has created an environment in which conscious and unconscious biases are allowed to flourish. So instead of saying plea bargaining has created an environment in which conscious and unconscious biases are allowed to flourish, you could just say plea bargaining allows conscious and unconscious biases to flourish.
Yeah.
So we took has created an environment in which, and we turned it into allows.
Yep. And I think that's
So in
pretty
many
straightforward.
ways, all right. Do you want to talk us through this next one? What are filler words?
So filler words, we all use them. I just used one right there a second ago. These are the us, as, os, etc. Anything that you use to fill in the silence when you're unsure of what you want to say next. Like right there. And we all use these to some extent in our natural conversation, and there's no reason for why you need to get rid of them when you're just talking normally. But just like you wouldn't put a bunch of ums, us, or os in your papers, when you're speaking out loud and trying to give a public speech that's trying to convince and persuade someone, you probably want to minimize these words as much as possible. These us, os, us, and ums.
Yes. So filler words, as you've said, are usually not a product of a written speech, but instead, um, they have to do with just the written. With the spoken word. More about the spoken word, not the written word, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, it'd be really weird if someone just in their affirmative case had "I affirm the resolution" written in there. So
I have a thing actually that I could read to you all, uh, but not if Lawrence vetoes. Which is, I wrote a thing. I teach a speech class at the high school that I work at, and I created a kind of a speech that has some of these problems. I actually created it for a positive feedback drill. But are you ready to hear part of this, Lawrence?
go for it.
Okay. So the name of this fake speech is TV's Flying Through the Air, and I'm going to read part of it. Hey, anyway, thanks for inviting me to this conference to discuss our paper on the aerodynamics of TVs. That is televisions, I think they're called.
That's beautiful.
That's the first sentence. The entirety of this paragraph is gorgeous. And I'll send it to you later. But in general, anything that you can do to minimize filler words, and we'll talk specifically about how you would do that later. Filler words are inefficient in the most obvious sense that they literally do nothing.
Well,
Okay.
it's not even that they just do nothing; they like actively harm your credibility because people who say us, os, and ums excessively are just perceived as those who don't have their thoughts together, and they tend to be perceived as less credible. So it's actually harmful.
Okay. So that's true. So the next thing that I have is unnecessary sentences slash clarifications, or emphasis without addition. And the major thing that I want to convey here is a lot of times in people hear advice that they need to be persuasive, and what they take away from that is that they just need to talk for a longer time about things. And to a certain extent that's true. If you don't spend a certain amount of time saying something, then people aren't going to remember what it is that you say. But sometimes people take this in exactly the wrong way. They think, oh, I just need to talk for the sake of talking about it. And what they do is they don't add anything to it. They just kind of like repeat in slightly different sounding ways what they just said. That is bad. Is emphasis without addition. It doesn't do anything because it's not more likely to convince someone of a thing. Lawrence, do you have an example of how unnecessary clarifications or emphasis without addition?
Yeah, so here's
that.
an example of a sentence. Prison sentences of black men were nearly 20% longer than those of white men for similar crimes in recent years, a racial disparity that is unexplained and continuously ongoing and affects the lives of so many because of the unequal prison treatment sentences they receive.
All right, so there's you kind of blazed through that, but there was certainly a lot in there that can be cut out. What I want to ask you is of this beautiful sentence that you've concocted, what parts of that to you are emphasis without addition?
Almost the entire last part, because it goes on to say, because of the unequal prison treatment sentences they receive, which is just a repetition of the first part, which is that prison sentences of black men were 20% longer than those of white men. And that's the same exact statement, but for some reason, it just got repeated twice in there.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, the continuously ongoing part doesn't seem to be necessary because I assume if this statistic is true, it's still ongoing.
Wait. I forgot. Continuously ongoing. That's a hilarious set of words. Those literally mean the same thing.
Yes.
Continuously ongoing. Oh.
I think my hastily constructed example is quite good. But yes. So the rest of it seems fine, because if it's like a racial disparity that is unexplained, well, that adds something, which is that there's no single way to explain why this inequity occurs and affecting the lives of so many. It doesn't seem like necessary, because I think we just kind of assume that if you went to prison for longer, that would kind of matter, but that's not like it says anything that's been said before. And I don't think like detracts from the message, so that's fine.
All right, another kind of efficiency, and I think we're nearing the end of the ones that we've currently said. Is so what I've written here is when you've already persuaded someone of something. And basically the message that I want to convey to you all is there's a certain point at which it's inefficient to tell someone to believe something that they already know, because it doesn't do anything. And what if you're trying to do is convince someone of something? If you've already done that, then any additional efforts towards that goal are pointless. So for example, if you're trying to convince someone that the sky is blue, first of all, any effort that you just have to convince them straight up is just, with a normal person, is not going to be useful anyway, because they already think the sky is blue. So just a huge waste of time. But different example, let's say you're trying to convince someone that a certain tax will be bad for the economy, and you give them, 3 different studies that prove that, and they're like, okay, I get it. And then you just give them another 6 studies. The point is that those additional 6 studies don't do anything because you've already convinced them of the fact. This comes out in debate because a lot of the time people feel pressure to overprove themselves to the judges, because a lot of judges have told them that they don't understand their things in the past. The effect that has is that it causes people to waste time that they could be spending proving things they really need to prove by proving things that they don't, because they've already proved it. You got an example for me, buddy?
Yeah, so a lot of papers will do this because they will cite like 50 studies in a row to just be like, our thing is true. And that's fine for an academic paper, but it's a little bit silly for when you're doing it in the context of a debate round and you're citing every study that a paper cites. So here's an example of a paper. It'll be like, blacks are less successful at getting their sentences reduced via plea bargain. According to a University of Michigan study, black defendants face significantly more severe charges than whites, even after controlling for criminal behavior. And then it says a study in Georgia in the 1980s found that people of color are prosecuted under the higher charges at a much higher rate than whites. Blacks are 21% more likely to receive mandatory maximum sentences. Once convicted, black offenders receive sentences that are 10% longer than white offenders for the same crimes. And if you scroll through the rest of this paragraph, there's like 3 more studies in there. Well, it doesn't seem necessary to cite, 3 more studies when I think the sort of simple case, which is that plea bargaining is racially unequal in its enforcement, has already been made. And now you're just citing studies that people are like, I've already heard this. I sort of got the point. You got me.
Yeah, that happens a lot with stuff like criminal justice system is racist. Another thing that it's important to ask yourself via efficiency for like a written product, like a case, is what do you think the chances are that your opponent will actually prove the opposite of your fact? Or that they'll even try? And keep in mind that if the answer is they're not going to try or they can't, then really like there's not a huge additional gain to reading a whole bunch of facts in support of that. So, for example, if your argument is that, I don't know, the criminal justice system is racist, that's a fairly easy argument to prove in debate, I've found, because there are just a lot of indicators that point in that direction. And the point is, if you think that your opponent, for some reason or another, let's say you know your opponent, you think that they're not going to challenge that point, that they wouldn't, then don't read 5 facts for it. It's a waste of time. It's not important to beating your opponent. It's not useful to you. Okay, Lawrence, does that make sense for a bunch of different ways people can be efficient? Does it, Lawrence? Talk to me.
I suppose it does. I think you've really convinced me.
Well, I don't have to suppose. So, so can you just go over this next thing with us, Lawrence?
Right. So one, I think, common misconception that people get, and I think we've sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, is that efficiency is sort of about conveying information in a way that is persuasive to the judge. And I think we've sort of come to this conclusion, which means that you're not efficient if you dump 35 arguments out in 10 seconds. Because, as Martin mentioned earlier, that does nothing for you. Like 35 poorly warranted arguments is basically the same as making 0 good arguments. And so it's not efficient to do that. So efficiency does not mean that it's blippy or unwarranted. In fact, efficiency means taking the same level of warranting and analysis that you would have applied to a previous argument and simply making it, in a shorter period of time without really detracting from the substantive claim that argument is making. So don't think of efficiency as sort of attempting to apply a different standard for warranting or analysis, but instead simply becoming better at conveying that same level of warranting and analysis in a speech.
Yeah, that's right. And one way of thinking about it is like if you have an argument, but you could think of all of the like unnecessary bits of the argument as kind of like a fat. So if maybe this visual metaphor makes 0 sense to you all, but I'm just kind of imagining like if you have a piece of meat or something like that, there are just all sorts of fat, and those create unnecessary coatings for your food item. And the point is that one of the goals is to cut off as much of those as you can. And in a speech, you're trying to cut out the fat as much as possible. And when you're done, you don't fill that with silence, right? So you take out all the unnecessary parts that don't contribute to the warrant, etc. You leave with a full argument, and what that allows you to do is to increase the argument or the other arguments where you need them to. So let's say you cut out all the fat from your piece, and you find out that that the warrant is like now a half sentence. Okay?
I mean, you have some strange analogies, but go for it.
No disputing the fact that I have strange analogies. What I mostly mean is that if you find that your argument is now incomplete, you use those gains from efficiency to supplement your point, to make it a real point.
I'd agree with that. Not necessarily the fat analogy, but this analogy or at this point.
So I just have a couple of stories to kind of like round us out, and then you can maybe have some stories as well. Um, most of these are from my novice year when I was still learning how to debate because I didn't know how to do things. I remember going up to my coach very explicitly and saying to him, my coach, I said like my coach's name, which was Mr. Clemens, and I said, Mr. Clemens, I'm trying to find a way of saying that something is important to a thing, that it is essential, that you really couldn't have a thing without it. And I'm just having trouble putting that into words. How can I say that something is so essential that if you didn't have that thing, you would have lacked it? I used words that were like that. And my coach just looked at me weirdly and then wrote the word key on my computer and then left. As in, I was going through all this stuff. I was like, how do I convey in as many words as possible the idea that something is necessary and important to a thing? And then my coach just stared at me and wrote the word key, like that is key to this other thing. And then he just walked off, and I was like, oh, mind blown.
That is actually pretty efficient.
Yeah, it is. The word key is one syllable, which, by the way, is one of the ways that you should think about efficiency. Just this is just a side note, but efficiency doesn't have to do with the number of letters in your word, because it takes you longer to read some certain letter combinations than others, and the meaning of letter is meaningless in the spoken word because all you have is syllables and sets of words when said out loud. So really, the most efficient one are the ones that have as few syllables as you can. That takes it less time for you to physically say them and pronounce them.
Yeah, it's like how my name is Lawrence. That's only 2 syllables, but my sister's name is Emily, which is 3. So Emily Lawrence, and they're actually about the same amount of time to say, despite the fact that mine's certainly much longer letter-wise. And if you just like multiply that out across whole paragraphs that you're reading, it turns out it's really more about syllable count than it is about word count.
I think if you were saying your name's fast, though, you could get M. You could you could you could get it down to Emily.
Emily.
Yeah.
Emily. That's
I
weird.
think if you like were just talking really fast and you just said Emily, like that would just make sense to her. And if you were spreading it, that's certainly what I would say.
Oh, I mean that's fair.
And also Lawrence could end up being like 1.5 syllables. You just like kind of just like compress the end of it. Lawrence.
Yeah. Okay. Today I learned.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get those gains, Lawrence. Got to get those efficiency gains.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so I have 2 other stories that I wrote down. This is actually preparation for the same tournament. My coach convinced me to write a criterion that was a sentence long. Oh my god, I wish I still had it. It was the actual criterion was like a sentence.
Mine wasn't quite a sentence, but I remember
it was just pragmatism. But it was just like I don't remember what it was. It was like securing welfare within the confines of a liberal democratic society with constraints or something. It was just like so long and unnecessary. And I remember one of my varsity debaters being like, Martin, why is your criterion so long? And then my coach being like, no, it has to be that way. And then the debater was like, okay. Oh boy. That case did fine too.
Like my criterion was like consistency with principles generated behind or from the original position, when instead it should have just been like my criterion is like consistency with the original position. But I decided to make it longer so it sounded better than it was. But as it turns out, it didn't do anything for me because judges couldn't flow that super long of the criterion. So like I don't really know what the point was.
Indeed. And then the last one, which is I wanna shout out a round that I'm judging. There's almost no chance that any of the people that I'm about to talk about are still involved in debate. I know for a fact one of them isn't. I'm pretty sure the other one isn't. So I was judging a debate between 2 people, and those people, I remember in particular one of their speeches. And in this speech, this person it was the 2 ends. It was very long. It was a 6-minute speech. They were trying to like convince me of something. But I remember that no matter how many words they said, they didn't make an argument. Like they just were not making arguments. It was the most Kafkaesque judging scenario, Lawrence, I have ever been in. It was like this person was looking at me. She was making eye contact. She was trying to be persuasive, but she wasn't saying anything. It was so weird. And I just sit there and endure it. And I'm just sitting there being like, as soon as you make an argument, I'm going to write it down. And then after a certain point, I was just like, I just feel guilty. I just felt guilty because she was clearly trying to persuade me of something. But it wasn't that I wasn't understanding. She was just, I understood every word she was saying. She was just never making an argument. She just never made an argument. She never said anything relevant or was worth writing down. But she kept talking. It was certainly the least efficient speech I've ever seen, only because she conveyed like no information in 5 minutes. What? How was this possible? I actually wish that I had like a recording of the speech. I really do. It was that horrendous. Oh my God.
Could not empathize. I don't think I've experienced nearly anything so horrendous, but also sorry if you're listening to this episode, whoever you are, and Martin's telling a story about you. But
I didn't even give enough information for them to know. Although I did sort of yell at them after the debate. It was like, how come I had no idea what any of you were talking about at any point? Like, what was going on? So weird. There's like no chance that they're involved in debate, and they don't know. It was around at the Greenhill tournament. I'll just say that. So I will. So yeah, those are my 3 efficiency related stories. Do you have any, Lawrence, or should we just move on to drills?
I don't think I have any. I mean, like, I just like did, local Oklahoma debate, and I don't think I was particularly inefficient. I don't think I was particularly efficient. Just like bland in there. So sad. And I can not recall any.
Quiet, Lawrence. Quiet.
Can't recall any time where I've judged a debate where they actually said nothing in an entire speech. So who knows?
Yeah, that was certainly an achievement. All right, when we get to you next, we'll talk about some drills.
All right, welcome back to our final segment here, where we're going to talk about some drills so we can take all of that random theory and stories that Martin told us and connect it into some ways that we can actually get you to be more efficient inside of debate.
Rude.
No offense. I love you, but no offense. Okay, so I think
offense taken. I'll never forgive you.
All right. Well, I guess that's the end of the podcast. So the one thing that you have to remember is that some people are just naturally like really good storytellers, and they're going to be really naturally efficient and just able to convey stuff to you without really having to practice. But for the vast majority of people, unfortunately, like in all of life, you're just gonna have to work for it. And so what we're going to try to do is present 3 drills that we think, if applied, and you don't even have to do these that often, but if applied and practiced, will actually lead you to be more efficient overall. None of these are sort of a substitute for just, reading books and watching speeches and all of these things that help you internalize these sort of concepts that we're teaching, but these are necessary to help you fix small things that do compound over time. So the first drill, and this is the one that I think everyone hates, is the filler word start-stop drill. So Martin, what is this drill that is so dreaded by the debate community?
In order to do this drill, you need another human being person. The object of the drill is for you to give a speech, and the idea is that this speech be simulated. It can be a speech from a past debate that you've had that you are redoing. It could be a speech from a different other drill that you've listened to other episodes of our podcast, and you get a sense of exactly what are the sorts of things you should do and how should you prove it the 1AR, etc. And you have already given that drill. One of the things that we mentioned was filler words like they're some of the hardest things to eradicate. And by the way, filler words can be long, and even the long ones are bad. So for example, there's someone that used to say, indeed all the time. They just say indeed between every sentence. That's 2 syllables. It's a filler word. Recognize it and get rid of it. It's a parasite. And what you do is you do a stop-start drill, which is you give the speech, some other person stops you whenever you say the filler word. There are random extreme versions of this drill that have to do with like squirting water at people or some random stuff like that. But instead, you could just, I often find that it's just enough to just stop someone and make them say something again. And the idea is that you make them take that word, or they make you take that word out of your vocabulary, that you try and give a speech without using those words. Lawrence, how hard is this speech? Or sorry,
Uh,
how hard is this kind of drill?
Pretty difficult. I'd say at camp, very few people in labs, ranging from, actual just novices never having done debate before to people who are in their third year of debate. Very few can get through a full minute of speaking without, well, on a subject that they're not super practiced on, without utilizing a filler word. And so actually one variation of this drill that I like to do to make it a little bit harder is to like give them a random subject and just make them talk about it, with like virtually no prep time. So just like, actually, have you ever heard of this game, just like Don't Get Me Started?
Nope.
Well, okay, so it's like apparently a sort of car game where you say "Don't get me started," and there's a subject that someone just randomly throws out. So like, "Don't get me started on 7-Eleven," and for as long as possible, you have to go on a very angry rant about the subject and just explain why you hate everything about it and like explain like why you shouldn't get them started on that subject. And so I like to use a variation of that and just like, don't get me started on and just throw out any subject. And when people aren't practiced on it, they very rarely can get through more than like 30 seconds to a minute without utilizing a filler word because they have to stop and pause and think about it. So it's actually pretty difficult. And a lot of people underestimate its difficulty, but a minute, that's pretty hard.
That is hard. 4 minutes harder. So these kinds of drills will not be helpful, and they will if you do them only in small doses, and they hurt. It's unfortunate, but there is no way that you will expunge these words from your vocabulary naturally. You can't do it by thinking about it. The only way for you to get more efficient is to give speeches in which you are efficient over and over again until that becomes your normal way of debating.
And I'll really echo that you just have to keep on doing this because back when I was in high school and debating locally more often and having to give more speeches, I definitely just even in my day-to-day conversations said less. But now that I'm in college and sort of slacked off because I don't have to debate personally, well, you've heard this podcast. Both Martin and I, despite the fact that we like teach speech classes and coach debate teams, sort of thing, we say and ums a lot, and that's because you got to do these drills to really keep it up.
I think I'm pretty good.
Oh, you have no idea.
I certainly say a lot of filler words, but I think I am better than average for sure.
Oh, perhaps. Although, in fairness, there are some segments where you will say for a long period of time, and I'm guilty of the same charge. It's actually so difficult to get over it.
No, yeah, I definitely say but I do think that part of the reason that we tend to overestimate the amount that people use filler words is in others, but not in ourselves, is that we just like notice them a lot.
Oh, I notice when I say us a lot. I actually kind of hate it. Okay.
Okay. I take it you did this last one. I know that you talked about it on a previous episode. So can you take us away about what's the number 2 drill you can do to improve efficiency?
Gradually shorter speeches. This is actually one of the only drills that I did before nationals my senior year, because it was just incorporated with the sort of 1 AR redo, which you can learn about in our drills episode from beforehand. But basically, it's just, as I said earlier, the standard for efficiency isn't just more arguments in less period of time necessarily, but instead it's to take a previous idea that took approximately, say, 30 seconds to a minute to explain, and to eliminate all of the filler and inefficiencies within that idea and distill it down to its purest essence so that you can convey that information in a shorter period of time. And so what this does is attempt to really apply that in the context of debate. So what I like to do is give perhaps a redo on a subject. And so for me, this would typically be in the context of a 1AR against a negative case, for instance, where, in typical fashion in most debates, you spend about 2 minutes on the negative case in the 1AR because there's 2 minutes on the affirmative case and about 2 minutes on the negative case. And so I would give the responses that I wanted to give in that period of time, so 2 minutes. And then at the end of that, I would look at I'd have someone generally there flowing it, and they would tell me all of the arguments that I've made, and then they would take 10 to 15 seconds off of the allotted speech time that I had. So instead of having 2 minutes to make those arguments, I now had only, say, 1:45. And so what I'd have to do is, without losing any of the warrants and arguments that I'd made previously, and this is the key part, you have to give the same speech in a minute and 45 without speaking faster and without really shaving off the crux and core of your arguments and the warrants in your arguments. And so what you do is just constantly shave, 10 to 15, maybe 5 to 10 seconds off as you get near the bottom. And at your most efficient, you'd be surprised that you can get through perhaps the same amount of arguments that previously took 2 minutes to make in maybe like a minute 20 and shave like a good 40 seconds off of a 2 minute speech. And what that allows you to do is maybe you talk too fast normally, and so you can use that time to slow down, or maybe you just want to add more arguments. So now in the same 2 minute period of time, you can, instead of making 6 or 7 arguments, you can make maybe 8 or 9. Doesn't really matter what the outcome is, but in the end, it's the whole point of the drill is just to shorten speeches, but to make sure that you're not speaking faster and to make sure that you're carrying the same level of warranting and analysis as beforehand.
Yeah, that's true. I did these speeches 0 times. No one ever told me to do them.
Oh, this is like the only drill that I did. Like the filler word start stop thing, like that just sort of got naturally like beaten out of me as a result of having to do like the gradually shorter speech drills, because I realized that like if I wanted to get to the if I wanted to get to the time limit that I wanted, then I'd have to cut out the filler. I'd have to cut out the filler words, because if I had too many of them, couldn't really do it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So the last thing, this is less of a drill and more of an exercise. But one thing that I find is very helpful is with a very critical eye, just go through your case and just cut out every unnecessary word that you can. Read over a case a couple times. One other thing that you can do, so reading over your cases is certainly like the ultimate end game. But one of the other things that you can do that's very useful is to do this with just a random news article you find, or just some random editorial. Just take anything that you can and try and, copy into a Word document or some kind of Google Doc or whatever, and then strike it through if you think that it's unnecessary. And getting in the process of just doing that and subjecting your cases to those kinds of analyses can really help you understand exactly what your goals are in terms of cutting things out. And it can really help you get your written product more efficient in addition to your verbal product.
Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, I'm not sure how much time that people have to do that, but if you could, that'd be like actually super helpful. In a similar strand of thought, I'll add a final drill that you can put in there, and this is one that apparently, like a few years ago, the top lab at VBI was forced to do this, and they sort of all hated it. Is to give a speech and to record it and then transcribe the entire thing out. And then using the analysis that you just talked about, where you like go through a news article or your old debate cases and whatnot and make them more strategic, you would have to do that to a speech that you gave and then re-give the speech according to that standard that you held yourself to.
Wow, that's tremendous.
Yeah, it's actually awful though, because first of all, transcribing just takes forever. At least it's good typing practice though. But second, because people just hate listening to themselves. But it really works.
I've done this before, and it's both of those things that you say. A, it takes a while. B, it's horrendous to listen to yourself speak. Both true, but part of the reasons for its success.
Yo, yeah, there are just people that will be like, this like actually just made me overall efficient. Not forever. Like it's not a quick cure-all fix or whatever, but like the next speech that they give, like I've seen people do this, like one night at lab and come back 2 days later after having finished this assignment, and the speech they give, it's just like night and day. It's like they're so much better.
So this goes into some of the stuff that we've been saying. The filler stop start drill, very important. Remember how I said that it's very important that you have another person there for this. Part of the reason goes along with the reason why it's so difficult to watch yourself speak, which is you may not realize this, you are your own worst critic.
Unless, of course, you're really, really conceited, in which case, fix that.
Well, it's funny, even people that are conceited, this is, I think, a misunderstanding about narcissistic people. I think that even the people that are conceited are their biggest critics, because they're conceited about themselves, but they also, it's not that they think that they can't do anything wrong. It's that they hold themselves to kind of high standards as they think that they're better or should be better than other people. So a lot of the time, they might have a different sort of philosophy towards altering it, but it's not that they just don't care at all and think that they're perfect. That's normally not what it is. Normally it manifests itself in a different way. Less psychoanalysis, a more debate podcast, but everyone's their biggest critic, which means that if you try and do a filler stop-start drill with yourself, you're just going to stop yourself way too often, and then you'll just get inside your head and be unable to give the speech. As a consequence, it's important that you have a neutral third party be able to tell you when to stop, and that you don't stop yourself during the drill, that they be the one to stop you.
Yeah, that's fair. This last thing that I'll throw in there, I guess, I think you have a story to tell, but before that, the last thing I want to throw in there, it's not a drill, but just more a general observation, which is that people tend to be pretty efficient when they're writing, and that's because they have to think of it, type it out, and then they have to like edit it, and so there's opportunities to improve your writing and things that are and things that you have pre-prepared. And people tend to be a little bit less efficient when they're speaking out loud because they haven't really thought about this and they don't have the opportunity to sort of edit on the fly, things like that. And so it's really helpful for arguments that you commonly extend or go for or respond to have more of it written out than not, because A, you know exactly how long it takes to make those arguments since you've hopefully practiced with them, but B, because it gives you the opportunity beforehand to edit them so that they're as efficient as possible, so that when they're in round, it's more efficient than just sort of making them up off the top of your head. Which isn't to say like pre-write everything, but the more that you have pre-written, like the more responses you have to the negative, or the more of the common arguments that you like to extend as the affirmative, for instance, the more of that's written down, the more efficient you're just generally going to be. Which isn't to say that there aren't downsides to pre-writing things out, but at least, even if you don't use these in round, the practice or the habit of just writing these out, it helps you become more efficient generally.
Definitely true. The more you can not have to rely on yourself to calculate being more efficient, and the more that you can just, do it ahead of time, do all of that work ahead of time, is less time that you have to think about it. Another note about efficiency, and is that this is just kind of a summary of all of the stuff that we've mentioned. Efficiency is a debate skill, which is to say that it's a skill that you need to hone in yourself. But it is an attribute of you. The idea is you just need to practice being efficient a lot. You don't want to be in the position where you have to think so much about what's the more efficient thing to say every time. If you do that, you will not be able to also think of arguments and persuade people. Instead, you just need to alter the way that you think about things and the way that your mind constructs sentences, which is difficult, and the way that you say and express those sentences. It's very hard and requires drills. You won't get good at it. You will not get good at it otherwise. But it is important that you go into it with that knowledge. You are trying to change the fundamental ways that you speak and think about arguments. This is a big and daunting task, but it's very important. It's nothing less than that, though. You are trying to cultivate in yourself a skill, not to try and learn all of the most efficient kinds of words to say. Like saying since, because of it, because, or whatever. That's one thing that you can take away from this. But the real thing is trying to learn a lot of different efficient words and then integrating those seamlessly into your vocabulary and the way that you construct sentences so that you are kind of automatically efficient by default rather than the alternative. I don't know how efficient that was. I thought I was conveying information at a pretty good pace, but some of that might be slightly repetitive.
No, I'd agree with it, because sometimes the repetition is good because it really hammers in the point. It's only inefficient if you haven't hammered in the point or it doesn't add anything new.
I do like hammers.
If that's what you got out of that, then I have failed.
Oh, too inefficient. All right, when we get back, we will go to our only important segment of this podcast, the mini debate. Well, that's our shorter episode for this week. Please let us know what you think about this shorter version of the episode. We are kind of discussing amongst ourselves whether it's better to have the kind of maybe a little more lengthy curricular 2-hour ones or whether it's better to have the shorter ones. Granted, this was a topic that there wasn't probably 2 hours to say about, but we're still very interested in the feedback that you have. So please email us at theargumentcuttingpodcast@gmail.com if you want to do that. We've answered a bunch of questions about cases and research on there just about this new topic. So if you have any of those, feel free to reach out to us as well. If you want to accuse Lawrence of being a secret reptilian and alien skin, please also send an email to the argumentcuttingpodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, so you should check out our Facebook page as well as our SoundCloud page for many other great additional episodes. We finally cracked 600 listens on an episode for the first time, which is our last one. So please send a congratulatory email to the argumentcuttingpodcast@gmail.com and we'll be certain to mail you nothing in response. Please, if you like our podcast, share it with your friends. The best way that this podcast can succeed is through you all, through word of mouth. If you have people in your area that you think could benefit, please just let them know that we exist. And honestly, our hope is that we will do the rest because we don't direct market to most of the states across the United States.
That would require money, so we don't have that. So
we certainly don't.
Sad.
So thank you very much to our sponsor, Victory Briefs. Victory Briefs is a premier debate camp, and they sponsor all of the technology that we use to make sure that our podcast can keep up and running each and every week. They're a tremendous camp and very nice to us, and you should go out and support them. Okay, so it's time for the mini debate, the only really important segment of our podcast. So this one is, what are some of the most beautiful natural phenomena? I would say most beautiful natural phenomenon. Now, there are obviously a ton of different options that you can select, and I have one that I would like to select, but I'm not sure if I can select it because I've never actually seen it in person. I've just am sort of aware that it's beautiful and just like the abstract. So I don't know if I'm allowed to submit it as an answer. So I'll just unbound it with. I mean, the point is, I think you're going to have an advantage here, Lawrence, in terms of natural phenomenon. So what do you think? What is a beautiful natural phenomenon?
Well, I'd like to start off with saying.
Oh, never mind. I have one. I have a good one.
Well, okay. Sure, go for it.
So the good one that I've actually seen is, now this is very strange to me because where I live in Florida, and to me the idea that the top of a mountain would be not visible due to clouds was just like, I don't even know if this counts. But I saw, like, I think, the highest mountain in Greece is, I think, called Mount Olympus. And I've seen it, but the top of it was obscured by cloud cover, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. Just like from like a natural beauty perspective. The idea that you couldn't see the top of it. And I kind of also got the sense of like why people thought that there were deities up there. Because they couldn't see the top of it because of the clouds. It was kind of awesome to see.
Well, but wasn't that story funny because you could go to the top of the mountain, because you could just hike up it, but no one ever bothered to do so because they just kind of assumed that the gods were up there?
Oh, I guess. I mean, I assumed someone, tried.
Yeah, because they were just like
some stupid guy probably tried. I mean,
then he probably said there were no gods there and then got like executed or something,
Yeah, it's a pretty likely situation.
All right, so I will say first of all that perhaps the most enjoyable part of my break was not having to do these mini debates. But should I be forced to give an answer?
No. Blasphemy. He lies.
Well, first of all, does this mean like beautiful as in nature, as in like, like what is it like limited to? Because for example, like I think that like for example that the 25th Hubble telescope, the 25th anniversary picture, like that Westerland 2 picture, that's clearly of like nature, I guess. Like, but does that count? Like,
sorry. You mean the thing that was captured by the telescope?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I thought you meant like, wow, the telescope is so pretty.
No, it's actually not that. It's actually not that good looking. Humans have clearly built better looking things. No, like the picture of like the cosmos, because you limit it to anything small here on Earth, and it's just dwarfed by just like the beauty of all of these, solar systems and universes and galaxies and just like all of space just like there. And it's just, and those pictures just look so good. Like have you seen these, like some of the Hubble telescope pictures and stuff?
Oh,
Just
so the thing that you're submitting is just like space.
yeah.
And just like the cosmos.
I think
I mean, like I I think that definitely counts
yeah.
because you can just because like for example, let's say I don't know, you're in like some random place in the Pacific Northwest and there like isn't smog, and then you like look up in the sky and you like see the Milky Way and you're just like mind equals blown. I mean, like is that kind of
Yeah, because like
what you're going for?
because part of it is like I don't know. I don't really study aesthetics. I don't actually know what the point of beauty is, but I would guess that it to some degree that nature is beautiful because it causes some form of inner reflection. And when I just stare out at space, I'm just like, dang, I'm tiny compared to all of this. And it's like to some degree the view that you would get like when you stare at the mountain that you're talking about because you're just like, dang, I'm tiny. But
Mount Olympus, it's not that hard.
what? Sorry. Mount Olympus.
Mount Olympus, come on.
Uh, but like when you stare out into space and just like all of space, where it looks like kind of it just like looks like a painting to some degree, but then you really take the time to imagine just how vast space is and like what it's full of and what potentials lie beyond what we can see. That's terrifying. It's also beautiful. So I don't know. That's my answer.
No, okay. That is a pretty good answer. Certainly mine was related a little bit more to like direct personal experience, but I think your answer is probably just better than mine. So I'm going to declare that I've lost. I've lost.
Wait, this might actually be a first.
No, it's not. You beat me on best fruit, you goofball.
Oh, that's because like I randomly decided to make this fruit debate turn into a super like emotional it reminds me of my family or whatnot. I don't actually remember what I said.
The peaches are tasty. I lost.
I don't actually remember what I said. I just remember it was a cheap blow. Anyways, I'll take the win. And oh wait, I don't really want to say the closing, so that's you still.
That's our episode for this week. Stay frosty.
No, this isn't an argument.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. It's just contradiction.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It is not.